Hello dear members of the Whispers of Soul. Today, we bring you a deeply romantic and emotional story. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss a meaningful story. Now, let's get started. The morning Clara Whitmore lost everything began like every other morning of her life had for years, precise, controlled, and ruthless. She stood in front of the mirror of her penthouse apartment, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back into a sharp bun, her makeup flawless but minimal. The woman staring back at her didn't look like someone about to fall apart. She looked like a CEO. Like power. And for a long time, that had been enough. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls of her apartment. Clara barely noticed it anymore. She had conquered it piece by piece, boardrooms, mergers, hostile takeovers, late-night negotiations that crushed competitors twice her age. She had climbed faster and higher than anyone expected, especially for a woman who came from nothing. Her phone buzzed. One message. From the board. Emergency meeting. 8 a.m. Mandatory attendance. Clara frowned slightly. Emergencies were her specialty, but this felt different. There was no explanation, no context. Just urgency. She didn't know yet that this meeting would erase 15 years of work in under an hour. The Ardent Group headquarters still smelled of polished marble and money when she walked in. Employees lowered their eyes as she passed, just like always. Respect. Fear. Sometimes both. But something was off. Whispers followed her steps. Conversations stopped too quickly. No one met her gaze. Clara entered the boardroom precisely at 8 a.m. Every seat was filled. Lawyers sat where executives usually did. A representative from the bank avoided her eyes. Even her most trusted advisor, Martin Hale, wouldn't look at her. That was the moment she felt it, a crack. Small, but unmistakable. The chairman cleared his throat. "Clara, thank you for coming on such short notice. What's going on?" she asked calmly, placing her tablet on the table. Her voice didn't betray her. It never did. The chairman slid a folder across the table. An internal audit uncovered irregularities. Significant ones. Clara opened the folder. Her breath hitched. Numbers. Accounts. Transfers. Her signature. Forged. Her heart began to pound, but her face remained still. "This is incorrect. We know," the chairman said carefully. "But the damage is already done." Martin finally spoke, his voice quiet. "The funds were moved through shell companies. It's traced back to accounts under your authority." Clara turned to him slowly. "Under my authority," she repeated. "Or through you." Silence. That was all the confirmation she needed. The betrayal didn't explode inside her. It sank. Heavy. Cold. By noon, the news was everywhere. The female CEO under investigation. Ardent Group faces collapse. Whitmore's empire crumbles. Investors pulled out within hours. Partners vanished. The board voted to remove her, temporarily, which everyone knew meant permanently. By the end of the day, Clara Whitmore was no longer a CEO. By the end of the week, the company filed for bankruptcy. By the end of the month, her accounts were frozen pending investigation, her assets tangled in legal hell. And the world that once bowed to her turned its back. The penthouse went first, then the cars, then the assistants who stopped answering her calls. Clara moved into a small, furnished apartment on the edge of the city. One bedroom, thin walls, no doorman, no skyline. The silence there was different. It didn't feel powerful. It felt empty. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to go in the morning. No meetings. No calls. No battles to fight. She sat at the small kitchen table one evening, staring at a cup of untouched coffee, when a sound broke the quiet. Laughter. Children's laughter. It drifted in through the open window from the courtyard below. High-pitched, unrestrained, real. Clara frowned. She wasn't used to noise she didn't control. She stood and looked down. Two little girls were playing near the building's entrance, chasing each other in circles. They couldn't have been more than 7. One had messy curls bouncing wildly. The other wore her hair in neat braids, trying, and failing, to look serious. They were twins. And they were laughing like the world had never hurt them. Clara turned away sharply. She didn't have the energy for innocence. The next morning, she nearly tripped over a mop in the hallway. Sorry, ma'am." The man holding it froze, eyes wide, clearly expecting anger. Clara straightened, irritation flashing. Then she paused. The man was older, maybe in his late 40s. His uniform was faded. His hands were rough, his posture slightly hunched from years of labor. "It's fine," she said flatly and walked past him. But something about his eyes stayed with her. They weren't afraid. They were tired. Deeply tired. Later that day, she saw him again in the lobby, cleaning the glass doors. One of the twins ran up to him, hugging his leg. "Papa." The other followed, breathless. "You promised we could go to the park." He smiled then, a soft, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "After work, okay. Just a little longer." They nodded seriously, as if accepting a sacred contract. Clara watched from a distance, something unfamiliar tightening in her chest. She didn't know why. Days passed, then weeks. Clara filled her time with legal meetings, paperwork, silence. The investigation dragged on. Her name remained in headlines, though the tone shifted from outrage to indifference. She stopped checking. The janitor, Samuel, she learned, worked every day. Early mornings, late evenings, always quiet, always kind. The twins waited for him almost every afternoon. One rainy evening, Clara arrived home soaked, her umbrella broken, her shoes ruined. She stood in the lobby, dripping water onto the marble floor she once would have scolded someone for dirtying. "Here." She looked up. Samuel held out a clean towel. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you." He nodded. "Storms come fast this time of year." "So do disasters," she muttered without thinking. He met her gaze, something understanding passing between them. "Yes," he said simply. "They do." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how he'd said it. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. Just acceptance. The next afternoon, she found herself in the courtyard again. The twins were drawing on the pavement with chalk. One looked up and gasped. "Papa, look." Samuel turned. "What is it, Sophia?" "She's watching us," the girl whispered loudly, pointing at Clara. Clara stiffened. "I wasn't." The other twin grinned. "Do you want to draw?" Clara stared at her. "I don't draw." "That's okay," the girl said cheerfully. "We'll teach you." Samuel looked embarrassed. "Girls, don't bother." "It's fine," Clara heard herself say. She sat on the cold concrete. The chalk felt strange in her hand. Useless. Pointless. And yet, for 10 minutes, she forgot about court dates and frozen accounts and betrayal. She forgot who she used to be. She was just there. When she stood to leave, Sophia held up the drawing proudly. It was a stick figure woman standing between two smaller ones. "That's you," she said. "You look sad, but not scary." Clara swallowed hard. That night, she cried for the first time since the collapse. Not for the company. For herself. And for something she couldn't yet name. Clara didn't realize how much that small chalk drawing stayed with her until she found herself thinking about it the next morning while standing in line at the grocery store. She hadn't stood in a grocery line in over a decade. Someone else had always done that for her. Now she stood there herself, holding a basket with only the basics, bread, eggs, milk, wondering how her life had narrowed down so completely. Behind her, a child was laughing. She turned. It was Sophia, one of the twins, tugging at her father's sleeve while he tried to read labels on cereal boxes with the seriousness of someone choosing medicine instead of breakfast. "Papa, this one has a tiger," Sophia announced. "That doesn't mean it's healthy," Samuel replied patiently. "But tigers are strong," her sister added. "You said we should eat food that makes us strong." Clara almost smiled. Samuel noticed her then and looked surprised. "Oh, hello." "Hi," Clara said awkwardly. The girls waved like they'd known her forever. "Did you practice drawing?" Sophia asked. Clara shook her head. "No, that's okay," the girl said seriously. "Everyone is bad before they get better." The words hit Clara harder than she expected. Everyone is bad before they get better. She watched them walk away, something warm and painful twisting in her chest. That evening, Clara received another email from her lawyer. The investigation was moving slower than expected. Some charges might be dropped. Others wouldn't. It could take years. Years. She closed her laptop and stared at the wall. For the first time, fear settled in, not the sharp fear of losing a deal, but the quiet, suffocating fear of becoming invisible. The next few weeks blended together. Clara began to notice things she never had before. How Samuel always stayed late, even when his shift officially ended. How the twins' shoes were always clean but clearly worn, soles thinning at the edges. How Samuel sometimes skipped lunch, pretending he wasn't hungry. One night, she saw him sitting on the steps outside the building after his shift, shoulders slumped, staring at his phone. "Everything okay?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked up, startled, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She hesitated, then sat beside him. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt honest. "My wife passed 3 years ago," he said suddenly, without looking at her. "Cancer." "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "She was a nurse," he continued. "Strongest person I ever knew. After she died, everything felt heavier. But the girls," he smiled faintly. "They don't let me disappear." Clara swallowed. "They're lucky to have you." He finally looked at her. "So are you. Lucky, I mean, even now." She laughed bitterly. "You don't know anything about me. I know what it looks like when someone loses something important," he said gently. That night, Clara dreamed for the first time in months. Not of boardrooms or headlines, but of standing in a small room filled with sunlight and laughter. A week later, the twins knocked on her door. Clara opened it slowly, confused. "We need your help," Sophia announced urgently. "With what?" Clara asked. "Our science project," her sister said. "Papa doesn't understand glitter." Samuel stood behind them, embarrassed. "I told them I could figure it out." Clara sighed, then stepped aside. "Come in." Her apartment filled with noise. Paper, glue, glitter everywhere. The twins worked with complete focus, explaining every detail to Clara like she was the student. "You're very smart," Sophia said at one point. Clara smiled sadly. "I used to think so too." When they left, the apartment felt different. Warmer. Less empty. Days later, everything changed. Clara was walking through the lobby when she heard screaming. She froze. One of the twins, Lena, was on the floor, clutching her chest, her face pale, her breathing shallow. "Call an ambulance," Samuel shouted, panic tearing through his voice. People froze. Phones fumbled. Time stretched. Clara dropped to her knees instantly. "What happened?" she asked, calm and sharp, the CEO returning in seconds. "She collapsed," Samuel said, shaking. Clara checked the girl's pulse, her breathing. "Asthma?" she asked. Samuel nodded frantically. "Yes, but her inhaler, she lost it." Clara didn't hesitate. She scooped Lena into her arms. "Where's the nearest hospital?" "4 blocks, someone said." "Clear the door," Clara ordered. She ran. Her lungs burned. Her heart pounded. But she didn't stop. At the hospital, doctors rushed Lena inside. Minutes felt like hours. Samuel paced, shaking. Sophia clung to his leg, silent for once. Finally, a doctor came out. "She'll be okay," he said. "You brought her in just in time." Samuel collapsed into a chair, sobbing openly. Clara stood there, hands trembling. In seconds, everything inside her shifted. She had saved something that mattered. That night, she went home and looked at her life with brutal honesty. She still had resources, knowledge, connections, and she knew what it felt like to lose everything. The next morning, she called her lawyer. "I want to settle," she said. Quickly. "I don't care about public image anymore." 2 weeks later, Clara sold the last remaining asset she could legally touch. She paid off Samuel's debts. Quietly. No announcement. When he found out, he was furious. "I can't accept this," he said, voice shaking. "You already did," she replied softly. "By letting me matter." Tears filled his eyes. Months passed. Clara started consulting quietly for struggling small businesses, no spotlight, no ego. Just help. She picked the twins up from school sometimes. Helped with homework. Learned to cook badly. One evening, she stood in the courtyard again, watching the girls play. Samuel joined her. "You changed our lives," he said. Clara shook her head. "No, they changed mine." She finally understood what success felt like. Not power. Purpose. Winter arrived quietly, covering the city in a thin layer of gray that softened its sharpest edges. Clara noticed it the way she noticed most things now, not as an obstacle to conquer, but as a season to move through. Her life had taken on a different rhythm. Mornings were slower. She brewed her own coffee, sometimes burning it, sometimes getting it right. Afternoons were filled with quiet consulting calls, helping small businesses untangle problems that once would have bored her. Evenings belonged to the twins, homework sprawled across her small kitchen table, colored pencils rolling onto the floor, laughter echoing off walls that used to feel too empty. Samuel watched it all with a kind of disbelief he never voiced. One night, after the girls had fallen asleep on the couch, Clara sat beside him, both of them listening to the steady hum of the city outside. "You don't have to do all this," he said softly. "We'd be okay." Clara didn't answer right away. She stared at Sophia's tangled curls, at Lena's calm, steady breathing. "I know," she said finally. "But I want to." That truth surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. The investigation against Clara concluded quietly. The worst charges were dropped. Martin Hale took full responsibility, his name becoming the one attached to scandal instead of hers. The media moved on, as it always did. Clara was offered opportunities to return, to lead another company, to reclaim a version of her old life. She declined them all. Instead, she did something no one expected. She opened a small foundation. It wasn't flashy. It didn't carry her name in bold letters. It focused on one simple mission: helping people who had fallen suddenly and unfairly, people who needed a second chance before the world forgot them. The first people she officially hired were Samuel and the twins' school counselor, who had quietly been paying for classroom supplies out of her own pocket for years. Samuel resisted at first. "I'm just a janitor," he said. Clara smiled. "You're a father who runs a household, manages time better than most executives I know, and raised two extraordinary girls after losing the love of your life. You're more qualified than you think." He accepted. The foundation grew slowly, steadily. No headlines. No applause. Just impact. One afternoon, Clara stood in the courtyard again, watching Sophia and Lena chase each other in circles, chalk dust clinging to their shoes. Sophia ran up to her, breathless. "You're smiling again," she observed. Clara laughed softly. "I think you might be right." "Good," Sophia said seriously. "You look better this way." That evening, Samuel invited Clara to dinner, not as a thank you, not as an obligation, but simply because he wanted to. They sat at a small table in a modest restaurant near the river, the kind of place Clara once would have ignored. "I never asked," Samuel said, stirring his drink. "Do you miss it? The power?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I miss feeling capable," she said. "But I feel that now. Just differently." He nodded. "I used to think surviving was enough. Now I want more for the girls." "So do I," Clara said. The words hung between them, gentle but full. Months passed. The foundation helped dozens, then hundreds. Clara watched people rebuild lives the way she had rebuilt hers, not by returning to what they were, but by becoming something new. One spring morning, she received a letter from a young woman who had received help through the foundation. It ended with a line that stopped Clara cold. "You didn't save me. You reminded me that I mattered." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer she kept for moments like this. Later that day, she walked home through the courtyard. The twins were waiting. "Surprise!" Lena shouted. They held up a drawing, 3 stick figures again. But this time, the woman in the center wasn't sad. She was smiling, her arms around the 2 smaller figures. "That's you," Sophia said proudly. "Before, you were lost. Now you're home." Clara felt tears rise, unashamed. She knelt and hugged them both. "I am," she whispered. "Because of you." Samuel watched from a distance, his heart full in a way he never expected. Years later, when people spoke of Clara Whitmore, they didn't talk about the company she lost. They talked about the woman who rebuilt herself quietly. About the foundation that changed lives without seeking praise. About the janitor's twin daughters who, in a matter of seconds, had changed a broken woman's life forever. And Clara, no longer a CEO, no longer defined by titles, knew the truth no headline ever could. She hadn't lost everything. She had finally found what mattered.